Hey there, sports psych enthusiasts. I'm Dr. Colin Fehr, and I want to share my passion with you. I love talking about ways to unleash the power of the mind. This recording is part of a larger lecture series I've created in an effort to make sports psychology concepts more accessible to a larger audience. The information contained in this series is especially well suited for students of sports psychology and is presented in a way that makes for easy listening for all. Welcome to Sports Psych Concepts. Hello, everyone out there listening. Here we are with another Sports Psych Concepts lecture. Today, the topic is how to build team cohesion. And of course, it's a big topic, and it's not like we really can cover every possible component there. But I do want to go over some of the foundational things on what goes into this and a few tangible tips or takeaways for you in whatever context you may be in to where this may be relevant, which I think that is certainly something that extends beyond the sporting domain. You think about any sort of working organization. We work on teams, we work with other people, we have to cooperate and collaborate. And the more cohesion that we have, we tend to have better performance and greater satisfaction overall. So I think a lot of relevance with that, but hopefully you come away with some usable tips as we go through this. So to extend a little bit more of the rationale of why I think it's important to explore this topic, there's just a few things that I want to say to really set this up. And the first is that these sort of group or team processes, or we could call them dynamics, just all of the different things that characterize the interworkings of the team and how individuals get along and work together, those are central to success in sport. But again, as I said, in any sort of domain that we want to look at where there's groups of people working together, those things are a part of it, and they shape the entire experience for a lot of athletes in many ways. Many athletes that are talented and have bright futures in terms of individual potential, they drop out of sports because the team dynamics are toxic or just less than ideal, we could say, on that. So that it's an important topic. And also we can just look and say, well, man, that championship team, that was so impressive. Well, everything that they were able to do, they worked so well together. Like, we admire these things, but there's only one championship team at the end of every season in every sport. They're rare, these high performing teams. So yeah, we could say, well, the teams that make the playoffs, those are high performing teams, but that's still rare if you compare that to the total number of teams that competed in the league or across the state or the conference or whatever. The high performing teams, they're rare. And so it makes for an interesting thing to explore because it's so unique. And even top individual athletes, if you look at individual sports, for example, you have a professional tennis player. It's like, well, they don't, what do I need to explore team cohesion for them? They don't work on a team, they're out there, they're playing singles, and so maybe that doesn't apply. But they have support teams. And they'll say that, I think grateful for my team and everything that they did to help me. You got to have cohesion on that, and in terms of how different professionals are communicating with each other, supporting and helping each other, and then supporting the individual athletes. So even in that context, there's still application for this topic. So with that as our backstop, let's try and answer the question of what makes a team. Some specific things, because we've got to make sure that we've defined it so we know what it is that we're talking about here. It's something that seems self-evident because it is in many ways, but we can extend it and make it more specific. So the first component of a team is that there's this sense of a collective identity, right? Where it's we do this as a group, when that's the sort of language that's being used rather than me or I. That's the sense, right? The identity is bound up within the team, and the individual. It doesn't mean that there is no individual identity. It's just it's framed within the context of the team and what it is we can accomplish together with my individual contributions. Okay, there's also distinctive roles for members on the team. It's not the same. Now there could be some overlap in different types of things. Obviously that makes sense, but everybody has a specific job. Then you hear the expression out there like do your job, right? That's one that was made famous by professional football coach. You may know who that is. You can look it up online if you don't and figure out who it was that said that. But there's different roles, distinct roles on the team that contribute to the overall success of the team, and that's a really important part of it. There are also these very defined and structured communication channels. You'll see this in sports teams, for example, at least high performing sports teams, where there's a lot of communication, a lot of chatter, there's talking, right? And you hear coaches say that, talk to each other, communicate, let each other know what's going on. And it's very clear and distinct. And sometimes that fits within the roles as well, but there's some structure on that. And then every team has some norms, just different behaviors and attitudes and just the way that things are done, like what the team does and what they don't do is reflective of kind of the team culture. And we're not going to get as much into the team culture today, but norms are certainly a part of that, and cohesion is a part of that. So when we think of a team, these are the ways to really put some bounds on it, and maybe there's more that we could add here, but there's some sort of collective identity, there's distinct roles, structured communication, and then there's different norms that are unique to that particular team. So now let's look a little bit closer at those distinctive roles that I mentioned and how important they are. And when I say role, I mean maybe that makes sense, but I can define this a little bit more for you as well. Roles are they're certain behaviors that either are required behaviors or expected. Maybe it's not like a outwardly stated requirement, but they're expected of a person on the team, an athlete occupying a certain position. Okay, so these roles, they can be either formal roles or they can be informal roles. So a formal role would be something that comes with some sort of title or something that's stated outwardly. So the coach has a formal role. If you're an instructor, you have a formal role. If you're a team captain, there's a formal role. There could be other ones that are just named, whatever it is. And then so these, they're dictated by the nature of the organization, what it is, and the structure of the organization. So these are a lot of times they're baked in, they're built into that structure. Whereas informal roles, these really kind of arise from the group's dynamics or just the interactions that teammates have amongst each other. So you may have one athlete who's more of the enforcer of team policies, those sorts of things. You may have one who's a peacemaker. You have one who's the spark plug or the energizer on the team. You have the comic relief person on the team. Whatever. You have these different informal roles that just kind of arise out of here's the dynamic, here's some of the norms that are set, and those aren't always positive roles, I should mention. They contribute something to the group, but it may not always be in the positive direction. And so it's important to acknowledge that. Now, there's one other piece that a couple other pieces that I think are important as part of this discussion on roles. Okay, so when we're talking about team success, like, okay, we have some formal roles, we have some informal roles, but what's the clarity of those roles? Do people know what their roles are? And not only that, do they accept what their roles are? Because this is an essential ingredient for teams to succeed. The team members need to know what their role is. It needs to be very clear what the expectations are for them. And not only that, they need to accept it. They need to buy into what that role is. So, for example, if one athlete on the team wants to be the team captain, they really want to, but then they weren't, if it's a team vote, they weren't voted for that. Like it, and so someone else is in that role. Like, well, it's clear that someone else is in the role and this person isn't, but this person didn't accept it. They really want to be the team captain. So now they're going to undermine what's going on with their teammate, and that's obviously going to undermine success. So you can see how that works. We need both role clarity and role acceptance, because there, if we don't have those things, it can lead to role conflict in the example that I just shared. But it also can occur if, say, we put somebody in a particular role and they don't have the ability, or even maybe the motivation, or understanding how to achieve the goal. And so that creates this conflict. Like, hey, we need you to fill this role, but the athlete's kind of like, oh, I don't really want to be in that role. I don't want to be the captain, or I don't want to be called on in this situation. I don't feel like I have the ability. It creates this role conflict, and that also causes problems within the team. Okay, so these are important things to understand relative to this broader things. Like, there's different roles. What are they? They're formal, are they informal? Do the athletes understand what they are? Do they accept them? Is there any sort of conflict that can be mediated? These things can, understanding these things can help us understand the root of a particular problem on a team, if there's some sort of dynamic that's interfering with the team's success. So now I want to shift away from talking about roles and talk about group norms that I mentioned before, right? Those different behaviors, patterns of things, and how things are done, what the team does, what they don't do. Okay, so we want, as coaches, as team members, if we're a sports psychology practitioner or whatever, we want there to be positive norms and standards or expectations on the team. And that can be related to performance. Like, what's the standard level of performance that we expect? What's the standard pattern of behavior or things that we believe within this team? What's the level that we're trying to establish? How is it that people show up to practice? How do they leave their bag on the sideline? Is it open and there's stuff flung all over the place? So we have sort of a messy set. Like, those are examples, are like little things like that. But that's what we're talking about. We want positive norms and standards that support a high standard that lead to the goals that we want. So leaders, it's a really important part of their job, whether they're the coach. Oftentimes the coach is a huge influence on this, for sure, but it can be team captains, and it can be really anybody on the team, anybody, whatever, they're an informal leadership role as well. We want to establish these things by, well, this is what it is that we do, and this is what it is we do not do on this team, and these are the norms of productivity, as a way to think about them. But there's also this pressure of social norms. Now, this can be used in maybe a positive way or maybe not so positive way. So if you have like, take hazing, for example, is something that's been around for a long time, and sports teams, they think, well, this is just what we do. This is just an initiation thing, and we do all these embarrassing things that are degrading and humiliating to the freshmen on the team. But it's just part of what we do, and it's this social pressure there. And so the pressure can be really strong to uphold certain norms, but that doesn't mean that the norms are good norms and that those things should be supported. So it's important to recognize these things, because then it takes some social pressure in the other direction by some prominent members on the team, or the coach would be really the most influential one there, to try and help establish these and shift these in the right direction. This is why a lot of programs, they'll see coaching changes, right? So you'll have an administrator kind of see what's going on. They're like, nah, those aren't really some good norms. They're not performing all of that well either. And you have these different things going on. We need a change. And then that coach is going to come in and start fresh and reestablish all this stuff and make it new, because it can be hard to root that out if it becomes just baked into what it is that's going on for a coach who's been at a place for a while. So a couple of important things to understand on that. Now, the next concept I want to share that I'll spend a little bit of time on is related to this group dynamic that can affect just naturally because of the psychology of how we get when we're in groups, when we're within other people. So it's called the Ringelmann effect and social loafing, these related ideas. So the Ringelmann effect is when you if you increase the number of people in a group or on a team, then the level of individual performance tends to go down. It decreases, right, as the number of the people. So the classic example on that would be the tug of war competition. And I think this has since been re-examined since it was first explored, and there was maybe some conflicting evidence. But so just the idea here is what I'm trying to share with you. But so the tug of war example, right? You put more people on the rope, and they pull less than what they would pull if it was just them on the rope, because there's kind of this idea that, well, that other people are kind of pulling, and so I don't have to do as much as I would on my own to make up for that. And we tend to see this dynamic in groups, and it's kind of this interesting thing. And tied into this is this social loafing, right? So you have people on the team and they'll put forth less than 100% effort due to various reasons that can affect motivation, because it can kind of you can kind of cloak it in what's going on in the environment with the team. There's all these other things, and so it's like, well, maybe coach won't notice that I'm not giving 100% effort here because there's other things going on. I've seen this myself in high school weight rooms, for example. It's very interesting phenomenon where you're in there and you've got 60 kids in there lifting weights, and I walk down to one end of the room and everybody straightens up and they're doing stuff. When I'm there, I turn my back, I walk to the other end of the weight room and I kind of peek back over my shoulder, and they start loafing right away. It's like, well, he's not good. There's all this stuff going on. There's too much to pay attention to. I don't really care. So these are interesting things that obviously we don't want on our in a team situation, because the players tend to be aware of this. The athletes kind of like, oh, hey, such and such over here isn't bringing it today, and we know that, and then it's obviously not contributing to the goals of the team if that's the case. So what are some particular circumstances then in relation to this idea that increase social loafing? And then on the flip side of that, what are some things that maybe we can do to decrease it? Because we need to know what to avoid, but then also what to promote. So things that tend to increase social loafing is where there's no individual evaluation. So the classic example here that comes to mind, that's not necessarily a sporting example, is from college group work. I know a lot of students in college don't always love doing group work because the whole group gets the grade and one or two students did most or all of the work. And so if there's no individual evaluation component, then it leads to an increased likelihood that social loafing is going to occur. So we want to find ways to evaluate, even if it's a group-based activity, evaluate the individuals on that, and that can be a way to prevent some of that. And it also can happen if tasks are perceived to be meaningless. They're just not really important. They don't see the context of why that is. So here's an example on this that I think ties into the sports psychology realm pretty well, is a lot of team building activities. They're like these little activities that are fun, and we're going to do trust falls, and we're going to do a scavenger hunt, and all these different things that they're supposed to build team cohesion and connect the athletes together with each other. But there's not really any relevance to what the sport actually is. And so athletes aren't really motivated to do. It's like, well, what do I care? How's this going to build? How does this tie into basketball? We're out here running around in the forest at the park. What I don't get that, right? It's perceived to be meaningless related to, or at least in context of what the sport is. And so that can increase social loafing. We're not seeing that. And you could come up with sport specific examples, different types of drills that might be done in practice that don't really seem to tie into what actually happens in a competition. And so there's like the effort is going to go down, right? Or there's a level of redundancy. It's like, okay, we get it, we've done this. And so then they'll start to kind of loaf and relax. And Another component or another thing that can increase social loafing is when there isn't a clear comparison to what the standard is. Like, well, how are we supposed to measure what it is we're doing compared to what we say we want to do? We have a group standard of what this expectation is, supposedly, but with this one thing that we're doing, we don't have a way to directly measure that. So that ties into these different tasks that I'm talking about. Is like, well, what's the metric that we're using, and how do we compare this to what it is we're really trying to do? If it doesn't align there with how we're measuring success or different statistic or percentage of things that we're doing, then that can increase social loafing, which can be problematic. And if we have weak group cohesion, just athletes don't care to work together, be together on the same team. There's not this collective identity, the sense of we-ness within the group, then that will increase social loafing just on its own. And another example will be if the team is competing against a weaker opponent, so just motivation is decreased, right? Well, we know we're better than them, and so sometimes you see this. Well, we're playing down to our opponent. We're playing down, and many times this ties into where, well, what are our standards? Were we comparing to just this other team, or what are our standards of what we want to do? And if that's not possible or brought to the forefront, then sometimes the social loafing can happen, and then you see that. You'll see better teams lose to weaker teams because of this. They're not bringing full effort. And then just in general, the last one to mention is that there are, in larger groups, we tend to see more social loafing than smaller groups. So how do we decrease it then? I've already kind of mentioned this, but it's just simply discussing social loafing. So there's this understanding of what it is, and as part of that, we can involve the athletes to determine when it happens. Like, athletes know when they do this. They know when they're not giving full effort. They absolutely know. And then they know how to get away with it. So having conversations around it and just bringing it to bear and raising that awareness that coaches know what it looks like and when it happens, then that can decrease the likelihood that it occurs. We also should emphasize those individual contributions. So again, finding a way to measure that against the group standards, even the individual standards, what they're doing, and then emphasizing those things, reinforcing those things and what they're doing to contribute can help decrease social loafing. We also want to have role clarity, make sure this is very obvious what it is. Hey, here's your particular role, and so this is how you bring 100% within that role. So you don't get caught just saying, oh man, my role is meaningless, all this, I'm not going to try. Make sure that they know what their role is, and then accept the role would also be the other part of that. And then lastly, the simplest thing is just to do smaller units and groups, like break the team down into smaller combinations of athletes in the different types of drills that we do. And a lot of coaches do this anyways. It's kind of this obvious thing that's already a big part of practice, but here's just another reason why that's a good thing to do that. So now I want to talk more specifically on team cohesion itself. We've kind of set the stage with some of these other concepts that are important. So let's dive into this. Let's define it first, right? The simplest way to think about it is just it's like a magnet, right? How attractive a team is, or being on a team, to its members, right? They're attracted to be on the team. They want to be on the team. They want to be a part of it. They want to contribute to the team. That's what team cohesion is. So if you think about different experiences that you may have had as you're listening to this, maybe some teams you've been on had much more cohesion than other teams. Like, you really wanted to be a part of a team. It meant something to you. It was value in it. You contributed. You were motivated to participate and motivated to perform at the highest possible level that you could. This is the way to think about team cohesion, right? That magnetic pull that we feel to be on that team. Now, there's two different domains of this, or dimensions of this, that we can explore. The first is task cohesion, and the second is social cohesion. So task cohesion is the degree to which the team members will work together to achieve whatever their common goals are. Okay, whatever their objectives are. It's just how well they work together. to achieve those things, right? On the different tasks and things that they need to do. It's just the actual mechanics, nuts and bolts of working together to achieve the goal. Whereas social cohesion is more of the interpersonal dimension, like how attracted um, people are to be members on the team, to be a part of the team. Like there's this social dynamic. They like being together on the same team with their teammates. Okay, so it's that interpersonal dimension. So these things, the task dimension, the social dimension, they're on continuums, right? And you could have a team that has high task cohesion and low social cohesion, and vice versa. And then you could have a team that has low on both and high on both, right? And so that's what I want to shift and talk about a little bit more here now, because there is a relationship between cohesion and performance, which is ultimately what we're interested in here in the sports psychology space, right? It's like, well, all right, we're talking about team cohesion. We kind of make sense on why we want to build that, and we'll get into a little bit more in a moment on some steps that leaders and members of teams can use to build that team cohesion. But there is a relationship, okay, this circular relationship with cohesion. So you increase cohesion, that tends to increase performance. You increase performance, that tends to increase cohesion, and so on and so forth. It's a beautiful thing. So if we can build cohesion, then it's going to lead to that circular relationship that we want. Now, there are those different considerations to think about with regards to this. So I mentioned task and social cohesion as these different dimensions. Now, historically, the general thinking was that, all right, well, we need task cohesion to boost performance, but we don't really need social cohesion. Like, the players don't really have to like each other in that interpersonal way necessarily, like being together on the same team together, as long as they work well together. And this makes logical sense, and we can find examples of that out there. However, in recent years, there's been more evidence to support the idea that actually social cohesion does also have a relationship with performance. And so the ideal is that, yeah, task cohesion is super important, but we don't want to neglect the social domain as well. We want to increase cohesion in both of these dimensions to ensure that we're, boosting performance in every possible way that we can. Now, there's also a couple of context considerations to keep in mind here. So the the what type of sport it is, or what are the task demands that are placed on, that the athletes face? Are they on a team sport that is more of an interactive type of experience? Are they individual sports athletes where it's more of a coactive uh, activity, right? Where they're doing the same thing, but they're not having to work together. Like, a tennis player isn't passing, even in doubles, they're not passing the ball to their teammate, as in like volleyball. We see that in a team sport. So just like the sort of general arc of where research went on this originally is like, oh, task dimension more important than social, but now like they're both important. And the original thinking was that, well, in team sports, the cohesion makes a whole lot more sense than maybe individual sports, but there has been more recent evidence to suggest that individual sports also benefit from high levels of cohesion, which, again, it makes sense. Just maybe the dynamic of that and how that unfolds, it looks a little bit different, perhaps, because we talked about different norms and all of those different things that may factor into the team dynamic. But in general, the main takeaway that I want you to walk away with is that if we can increase cohesion in either the task or the social dimensions, then it can lead to this positive relationship with performance, which then can lead to greater cohesion over time, which is a desirable outcome. All right, so here we are finally to the ultimate goal of the entire presentation, is how do we build team cohesion? Now, I'm just going to share some general principles that can turn into a lot of different things from an operational standpoint. And so keep that in mind, because you can extend these things and actually turn them into team building activities or things that you might do, or just practices that are integrated, which would be even better, integrated into everything that it is being done within a team, to help, to where just building team cohesion becomes a group norm. It's a standard level of productivity and performance and what it is that is going on in the team. And so these first tips I'm going to share are directed toward the leaders on a team, the coaches and the team captains, maybe sports psychology practitioners if they have a role in these types of things, maybe early on in the season, and then maintaining that throughout. So the first thing is built around communication, right? Transparent, clear, often regular communication. Part of that is explaining what the roles are to establish that role clarity and acceptance, but just making sure there are clear channels of communication. The structure of communication is obvious and it's accessible to everybody on the team. And communication is a two-way thing, right? So leaders need to communicate, but that doesn't mean that it's just one direction. They're also willing to listen and understand and seek perspective from athletes on the team and other support uh, staff who have perspective to offer as well, right? So this is obvious, and it's why it starts as the most foundational component here. We also want to try to develop some sense of team pride or identity. So if you think of it, some examples here that we see in, I'll just say, college football. Okay, you have different position groups. Like they'll have their own film sessions many times. They'll have their own group meetings outside the context of the entire team. All of these different things, and many times they'll have their own T-shirts. Like, here's the offensive linemen. You're the only ones that get this T-shirt, and it develops a sense of pride in their role. And it's, of course, that's linked within the overall team. And so gear is a great way to do this, right? How do you build gear and swag and different things like that? The branding, all of that goes on there. This is a great thing to do. It's why you see coaches and organizations do this, to where they tie in that identity piece, and I am a member of this team, and you reinforce that. Great way to build cohesion for leaders. Okay, now also it's important to set challenging goals. So things that will, the only way that these goals can be obtained is for the team to come together, to work together to achieve those things. Okay, so that's really important. It gives them something to work for, to where they recognize, oh, the only way we're going to achieve this is if we all do these things together. And so that sense of challenge can be intrinsically motivating, right? That drive for achievement can be a big part of that. And that certainly can promote the cohesion that we want here. Now, I also want to mention social clicks, because I just mentioned, oh, we have position groups on different teams, and so this is part of it, and we can use that to promote team cohesion and everything. But now but we shouldn't have social clicks. I'm kind of confused, right? So social clicks, this is a different dimension. They kind of form organically on their own, where you have different athletes kind of pitted against others, and like, well, we hang out together, but I don't really like them over there, and so we don't hang out with them. And it becomes this social dynamic that is separate from the team, but then it affects the team. And sometimes this is where bullying comes from. If you see youth sports, you have a couple athletes get together, that just creates a certain dynamic, and then they start picking on another athlete on the team, and it can be seriously problematic. And so as leaders of teams, it's important to discourage those things, try and disrupt them, design groups and drills that practice where athletes and players get together with everybody else on the team. They have an opportunity to interact with everyone else on the team. So you'd be say, hey, today you're going to play a different position on the team in this particular drill, because I want you to appreciate what it is your other teams are doing, what this person does for you, and how it relates to what you do. And you're going to connect, and then you're going to have that person going to tell you what their role is and how they fill that and what it is they do. So there's different ways that different activities and things can be designed to help with that. But we definitely don't want social cliques forming in great regularity. Now, part of that, and then everything else, also I think is we want to retain team members. So there's this sort of continuity. Like if we have high turnover from year to year in our sport, and this, you see pro sports, it's like, oh man, there's you just see that athletes get traded, they move around, all this, they want to go somewhere else, they move around. And so, it can be hard to have that team cohesion piece, at least on the social dimension. But the task cohesion then becomes a central part of that. But if we can retain team members, then you have that continuity, especially if you have positive group norms, then you can have just this sense of cohesion that's there and it carries over from year to year. And part of that may be just having regular meetings with the team. A way to retain team members is to have them get together, different things. And this can be within the context of like at the athletic facility, the practice site, or it could be you have a team dinner. I mean, that's just a classic thing. It's an opportunity for the team to get together where you can have a serious component. As a coach, you can talk to the athletes, share a few ideas, talk about some things that are related to the sport, but it's mostly an opportunity for them to get together and talk and spend time. And something that's very closely tied into that is for leaders to establish team cohesion, they need to know what the team climate is, which means they need to know their team members on another level beyond just what they see within the practice space and on the sideline. Or they need to take advantage of moments on the sideline in different informal settings to talk to their athletes and connect and see what it is that's going on, understand things in their life that may be outside of the sport that are affecting what it is that they're doing in their sport. So all of these things, as for leaders in these sports contexts, if they are intentional and they strive after these things and they build different, it doesn't always have to be activities. I know I use that word a lot, but just different interventions or, interactions around these things, it will lead to greater team cohesion. So, with all of that perspective in mind now, with what some leaders can do to build team cohesion, what can team members do to build cohesion? And these are things that coaches or leaders can share with these team members to say, okay, well, these are the things that I'm going to be doing. What is it that you can do to support and build this cohesion we're after here? And the first one is, of course, the connection piece, the relational piece. Get to know your teammates, talk to each other, find out who each other is, find ways to appreciate the other person and who they are and what they bring to the table and how they may be different than you and how they may be similar to you and in other ways. And again, there's ways. This takes some sort of proactive effort. You can see why leaders are so important in this, because they can help with this. They can support this, right? But as leaders, you can encourage it to also happen organically. Now, team members can also look for opportunities to be proactive, to take some initiative, to be helpful and reach out and do things for their teammates, right? Just like be a good teammate. Look for opportunities to help them out and do things that can help the team. They'll see that, and that contributes to the culture of the team. So we need to cheer for, encourage our teammates. This can be challenging, as I mentioned earlier, with the relation to the role acceptance. Maybe I don't really like my role, and so I'm not going to cheer for the teammate on the team that has the role that I want, and so then that degrades cohesion, that takes away from it. So teammates, to be a good teammate, we're looking for opportunities to be helpful, and we're cheering for, we're encouraging. We want our teammates to also be successful. And so another way to frame that is, we as team members need to take some level of responsibility for our teammates' success, right? We take ownership over whether our teammates succeed in different contexts, right? What is it? And so we're fundamentally looking at our role as a way to, it's not just how I can succeed as an individual, but how can I help my teammates succeed? Because if I help them succeed, they're going to be more likely to help me succeed. And if we do that, then the team is going to succeed, right? So much of this is a mindset on how we do this. Now, I mentioned communication for leaders and how important that is. It's also important for team members to communicate. Again, it's a two-way thing. If we don't take advantage of the influence that we have with our ability to communicate, well, then it's probably not going to contribute to team cohesion in the way that we want it to. And so every team's going to have that system, that structure of communication that's in place. And so it's working within that. It's okay. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to step outside whatever the established communication channel is, but working within that and taking advantage of that and using that to contribute. And then lastly, of course, it seems so obvious, but to actually bring your best. Do your best at all times and whatever it is that you're asked to do, regardless of all of these various factors that might give you reasons not to do your best, right? It's like, how can we really ever justify not doing our best? There's different circumstances that can get in the way of whether it's like on an absolute sense, but just relative to the circumstance. If we do our best all the time and other people are around on the team and they see that, that's going to support team cohesion in the positive direction. So I hope all of those things are helpful. Those are the final tips that I have to share on this. I hope you have some ideas on how to build team cohesion. You understand the foundational components that go into it, why it's so important, and have some actionable ideas that you can go and take and implement in the future. So thanks for being here for this presentation, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you for listening to this recording. I hope you learned something about sports psych, perhaps something you didn't know before, and maybe even something you can apply in your life more generally. If you liked what you heard, feel free to share this presentation with others who might be interested. And if you're interested in more content like this, visit my website at fehradvantage.com, or visit the Fehr Advantage channel on YouTube, or find the Fehr Advantage podcast on Spotify.